Hey,
Good morning, August.
hey, great to see you. So I will move closer to better Wi-Fi.
All right,
Just I'll be moving around.
all right.
And okay, so moving.
So welcome to the mensis mirabilis. Have you heard
What's
that
that?
phrase?
No,
You've heard of the annus mirabilis?
I think I've heard, but I have no idea what it is.
Okay, so the annus mirabilis is the miraculous year in Latin. And it's been used a few times, but the one I'm most familiar with and that's been making the rounds lately is Isaac Newton. There was a plague right when he was about to start his scientific career. And so he was stuck in his home for a year away from London, apparently under an apple tree. And so he had all these deep thoughts and figured out gravity and optics and calculus and the scientific method and pretty much invented the modern world. So lots
In
of people
terms
have
of,
been saying that, well, hey,
in
this
terms
is a
of,
great, I think the same, this is a great chance for us to have an annus mirabilis. And the rejoinder is, yes, but Newton didn't have 30 hours of Netflix queued up.
nice.
But I think that is kind of what we're talking about here, is that an opportunity for a similar sort of revolution, but understanding, for lack of a better term, the spiritual world rather than the physical world.
Is the connection stable on your end?
Sometimes. So we may have to repeat
Okay.
ourselves a few times. So it's hard. Yeah, we drop out quite a bit. So we need a error correcting code. If you want me to repeat something.
What I would suggest is, I see you recording this thing, and I would suggest that we will just start the kind of the thing that we would plan to publish just now or after some so that's the idea.
Yeah. So we've been going back and forth over chat and LinkedIn and so forth. What do you currently see as the great opportunity here? What is the thing you would like to see us accomplish?
I think people can accomplish everything they want. And going this way, the next question is how we would be able to help people every time really want when they imagine a change or transformation. And this is something that I've been experiencing with my kids, for example, because these are the young consciousnesses that are trying to grasp the world, and they also have their wants, but then the wants are just imagined wants, and then they're not really aligned with their effort that they would need to put into to achieve what they want. And I think that's just a one kind of introduction to what it would mean. But then when we really go to the adult people, they, for the most part, they really know that if they really want to achieve something, they need to put an effort, attention, and intention into that. And then my work and how I try to help people is navigate themselves, or help everyone to navigate to a place inside of them. And sometimes I refer to that just conceptually to DNA, so the hardware of human being. And it has a knowledge and has experience, and it has the notion of what a change means, because human beings have evolved through thousands of years. And that means that our body and our DNA and everything that really kind of helps us being here knows the basics of change and basics of transformation. And I think the most profound change or impact is possible if people are effectively guided to that instrument they have inside. And this is how I have made my journey up to this point, where I say, well, I help people I'm helping them to navigate to that place. And I call that place transformation gene. So speaking from the same perspective of the DNA. So there is this transformation gene conceptually, and I'm trying to, first of all, guide them to that place, and then together helping them to activate it. What it means, if the gene is activated, then it's expressed. And when it's expressed, people can be driving the change, can be the leaders of the transformation instead of being the followers and reactors. And why I'm using the terminology activating, it's from the like a few decades of latest research around epigenetics, which says, of course, DNA is the hardware, but there is something that they have observed. So the two twins having equal DNAs, but experiencing different environmental conditions, different behavioral patterns, have different life, and what would be that? Life longevity, for example, or different kind of
outcomes,
health
responses.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Different kind of health-related outcomes or well-being-related outcomes just by this other factors. And then they realize that this layer, epigenetics, like a software, is determining which gene sequences are silenced or or more expressed. And that's why I kind of borrow this terminology to say what would be the way and what would be the approach that would be very impactful. Because what it means, when people have this gene activated, they first of all change their life whichever way they want.
Yeah.
And then that expresses to all of the social networks around them, or social dynamic, the social circles. And then that means they would be becoming the ambassadors or the advocates or evangelists of that thing, and they would be expressing it. And this is how the humans learn from each other. They see, oh, empathy. It looks like empathy, and that triggers their inner DNA react to that, and they learn, oh, well, I have it too. Or that's kindness, or that's mindfulness. Oh, this person looks like a very, I know, capable of concentrating. And that triggers the same concentration capability inside. And I think that would be just scaling it natural and using the power of human being.
Okay, it's interesting. It reminds me, one of the reasons I decided to dress like this, I was thinking, it's a little early in the morning here. I was like, should I dress up in a suit or a collared shirt? And I said, the most practical thing for me to wear is actually exercise clothes, because after this, I'll be doing our family workout. But also, I was thinking, to your point, the one portion of education that actually mirrors that behavior is physical education, right? Is that when you go out, is that the only teacher who's actually required to practice what they preach is the gym teacher, right? They must go out and actually show you that they're physically capable of accomplishing all the things they talk about. And
exactly.
And that is an interesting, I've been trying to think about, in some ways what we're doing is not, it's like an academic exercise, but it's not an academic exercise, right? It is, we are trying to think clearly. We are trying to critique ourselves and each other. We're trying to create a community around that. But it's, I think the thing that you're saying there is a really profound and important thing. And one of, I think our challenges here is to figure out how to articulate that precisely so that we are thinking clearly and are sure that we understand each other and that other people do too. And the simplest word that I've been playing with around that idea is the idea of analog thinking. Both in the sense that this is not a cheap digital copy, right? Transformation is not something that usually, sometimes it does, but usually it doesn't happen just because you heard some words. It usually happens because you've been in proximity to an environment and an experience and a community and individuals who are living a certain way. And then you have an analog, a mirroring reaction to them where you start wanting what they want, doing what they do, and almost as a trailing indicator, thinking the way they think.
Exactly. Yes, you mentioned one of the keywords that I'm using recently. It's mirroring. It's
Yeah.
exactly how the human possibility is always mirrored from one human being to another, and our basic instincts are telling us we have it.
Yeah.
And then we as a scientist, certainly we put our effort into moving that frontier towards more clearer understanding. And then we try to find vocabulary that would be expressing in a most possible clearest way how we could able to communicate, and then letting people experience that as well.
Right. Which is why the other advantage of the phrase analog is, you familiar with the concept of D to A and A to D? You know, you have in your computer, you have a digital to analog converter, which is like your speakers, but then you have the analog to digital converter, which is like your cameras and your microphones. And one of the surprising things I learned back in my minor in electrical engineering was that D to A is really easy and A to D is really, really hard. And the easiest way to do A to D is to do D to A and iterate and compare. And I think that in some ways, you and I have had this analog experience of transformation. And one way to think about what we're doing here is this iterative A to D is like, okay, we've had these experiences. How do we encode them in a digital form, which gets all the benefits of digital, you know, fast transmission, it's editable, it is critiquable, but then keep iterating on that until we're achieving the desired analog goal, right? And I think that to me is the closing of the loop that, as you and I think have both experienced on both sides of it, is the most common failure mode of traditional education, right? In both in terms of our research and our personal learning.
Right.
You know, and I think that's actually the one thing that I was talking about this in a different podcast, media project, YouTube channel. I'm not sure what the right word is for this. That we have a vision of the change we want to make in the world, and we pursue it. But more often than not, it's this curve, right? Where at first you're not creating any effect you want. And then finally, and a lot of times you just get stuck there. But then you start creating it. But then what you discover is that you create the good thing you want, but then you're also creating these bad things you don't want. And if you're not careful, over time, the negative externalities build up. You know, and that's why the transition from almost a self-help, a personal authenticity development, want to making a dent in the universe kind of a mindset can become pathological. And so there's this, and that one thing I want to talk to you about is that, like, defining this thing, right, our first digital copy of our analog experiences, is we need to figure out how to incorporate negative feedback into the system in a way that doesn't discourage people from making brave attempts to change the world, but does, for lack of a better term, institutionalize this self-skepticism. I think Rudyard Kipling said it best. He said that if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, yet make allowance for their doubting too.
Yeah, you just touched a very interesting perspective, and a little bit to coming back to your analog to digital. I even realized there is this transition from internal experience. Like you said, we have had our own experience of transformation, and it just on the level of biosignals that are converted into the neuron signals that we have as a memory, as an experience. And then the first transition is actually from us to the words. So that the concepts, and they can be drawn like a figures and like a methodology, or the concepts or the images. And that's the first transition, I think. And then after that, we are trying to use technologies to amplify or to make it more scalable. So yeah, there are actually, I think, two transitions. And of course, we can be sometimes lost in translation. And then, as you wisely said, we have to be also open for these feedback loops that coming back and saying, well, your experiences are not possibly covering everyone's experiences. And then maybe you need to kind of incorporate all of this social experience with things that we are creating. And then the other thing that you mentioned about drawbacks or side effects, yes. In my work, out of the transformation framework, which has 8 tools, they explain how you in the first 4 tools, look for the root cause. So what is this attitudinal barrier that actually is the cause for you to procrastinate, for example, or to fail with your New Year's resolutions? So you, like, out of 8, half of them figure out, because most of the solutions fail because they are addressing the wrong problem. And the next 3, yes, and the next 3, 5, 6, and 7 is for designing the new experience. And then you can plug in technology, you can redesign your home, you can remove some things from your kitchen, like microwave or stuff like that. And then that's how you redesign your experiences and your environment. And tool number 8 is exactly connecting to what you said. Whenever we aim for change, it's very important to be mindful about not only achieving positive encouragements and maybe amplifying a certain behavior, and even creating positive behaviors next to the one that we are targeting. But sometimes when people start to meditate, they also start to be maybe reading books more often, or maybe go for a hike, which was not the initial thought or the initial behavior. So there are these target behavior and surprise. I'm just explaining a little bit of that tool. And then on the other side, we need to be always aware there are possible negative outcomes for ourselves and for others. And the one is negative unintended. We call them backfires. So there can be something really backfiring on you. Let me give you maybe the simplest example, and it can be any behavior. For example, some people go to gym, and then when they have had hard times, but then they get into this practice, and they might go further and further and further and actually overdo it so that they start to spend their more hours that they actually supposed to do work. And that could be a backfire. The same can go with reading. So people say, oh, I would love reading more books, but then they get into that and they read so much that actually forget to eat properly or whatever that is. And those are called backfires. And the last corner is dark patterns. So when people get into the designing this, for example, technologies for influencing people's behaviors, and sometimes it's reminder, it's not about technology, it's about the creator of technology, to see whether that will be holistically used for good, or there will be bad intentions in the design. So that's kind of reflecting to what you just said.
It's funny. I have a mental picture that I found very useful because I think in equations, having been trained as a physicist. So most people think life is kind of like a Gaussian curve, right? That's kind of how our intuition tends to work, right? Where, you know, this is really good, and then there's some negative, there's some fall down, it's less good over here. But overall, anything I do is intrinsically good, because that's how we tend to view our actions. But there's another equation known as the Sinc curve, which is sine x over x. It looks like a pulse. So starts out small, it goes up and down, and then there's a peak, and then there's like this. And I've come to the conclusion that all human activity is actually a Sinc curve, right? There'll be a positive part up here, which is the good part that we're trying to get. But then adjacent to it, there's actually a negative effect that happens underwater. And the flip side is also true. There's really, really bad things that happen that have, let's call it front fire. And so it's a backfire, where so the plague is a really bad thing, right? But the good thing that came out of it in Newton's day was this deep contemplation and the modern world. And the modern world is a really good thing. And it's had some really negative. And realizing that if you accept that premise, that all human activity has this Sinc curve to it, then it implies that you can't solve it by yourself. because you can spread it out or you can stretch it in or whatever, but there's this intrinsic negative externality to everything we do. The best you can hope for is constructive interference, is that future actions and future people, is that you empower people to see your backfires and that they can create their positive amplitudes that compensate for that, right? Which to me is really the essence of the scientific revolution, was not that Newton invented the right answer to all these questions. In fact, we now know the Newtonian physics was wrong, and profoundly so. But what he did was give us a method and a culture for improving upon, critiquing, and eventually correcting his original vision, as Einstein did.
Yes, yes. I recently watched one nice, it was a play with Brian Greene, Professor Brian Greene.
Oh yeah.
Performing. Have you seen that? Light Falls? It's called Light Falls. And it's just amazing. 1 hour and like 20 minutes or so. And the Brian Greene is the main performer. And there are actors in the background, and they have these transparent curtains where they project different things. And it was all about walking through the life of Einstein. And of course, there was this references to Newton and how the inspiration and how it was evolving the scientific understanding of reality. It's such amazing. And then, yes, of course, they said Newton, when he came with his revelations and put them out there, he just said, okay, I've got that far. And then the rest, I leave it for the reader's interpretation. Fair enough.
Yeah, and this idea of showing your work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, this is the real transition from alchemy to chemistry, right? Is that in alchemy, you buried your mistakes and you acted on authority. In chemistry, you show your work, you publish your finding, and you want people to reproduce it. And there is a extraordinary status game that science created, which is that if you show your work and you're proven wrong, you gain status rather than losing it, right? Which is one of the things that's wonderful about Silicon Valley, is that if you have a failed startup, but you've learned from it, it actually increases your status, which is most of the status I have at the moment, but that's another story.
But that's very interesting. I never really looked at the specific detail, but that it really tells, I think, something about our psychology, that people learn deeper insights, possibly through this unsuccessful experiences, because successful experiences just give you the taste of success and happiness, which just then is a celebration, and not really rewinding everything and seeing the details, what actually brought you to success. But instead of when you are not successful, then that's the journey. You're looking into every single detail to find out what could be improved. And I think that's why the learnings from failures are so much more profound comparing possibly to the success.
Charles Schultz, I think, said it in a Peanuts cartoon. Lucy was talking to Charlie Brown, and Charlie Brown says, I've heard that we've learned more from our failures than our successes. And Lucy says, that makes you the smartest person in the world, Charlie Brown. But as you and I both know, intelligence and learning are not always directly correlated, right? Because as I've discovered quite painfully, both personally and in community, that we can use our intelligence to avoid learning, right? To protect the ego. And I think that, to me, is what I'm hearing you say is that a lot of your work is around passion-driven transformation, right? I have this desire to create this thing in the world or in myself, and therefore I am willing to undergo a redefinition of things I previously considered obviously part of the way things are.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I can give you the same thing too, is that people have to want something badly enough to give up their comfortable definition of who they are.
Yes, that came out of the tool number 4 in my work, which is called circles, and the circles go like this. It's just like traffic light, yellow, no, green, yellow, red, and green people are self-driven, so they figure out that they would like to learn, I don't know, snowboarding. I just go into it. And then red people would be saying, no, never, that's not for me. I'm not gonna do it until I die. So negative. And then yellow people are actually the people that I call people of January 1st. Why? For obvious reasons. There is intention, and there is this kind of, as I refer back to the previous childhood example, there is this want, but it's just a superficial want. It doesn't have the grounding, but the intention is there. And then the whole idea is to help these people because they already have this vision, or at least the direction they want to move. And the whole thing came out from this perspective that I usually communicate is, why shall we look at the red people, and especially when we look at the health campaigns or countries or municipalities trying to provoke more healthier behaviors and stuff like that.
Right.
They usually target the very red people. Okay, let's take smoking. Okay,
Yeah.
who are the heaviest smokers? And then I think the delusion is that I pursue. I think they have is, if we are able to transform the hardest part, then the rest is easy. But it never happens. It's failure every time. So my premise is, why don't we start with the yellow people that are just like a step away from the green, and then you just unfold it like layer by layer, and the closest yellow people have just a one small bias or attitudinal reason not to do it, and
Right.
you just figure out what it is and remove it, and
Right.
then
The
join the
marginal
green
customer,
people.
as it were. Yeah.
Yes. And that's why I always, and I have had these questions in my talks. People say, well, but you will never be able to transform everyone. I said, that's not the point. The point is you're helping those people who are willing. And as they are transitioning, as they are transforming to the new persons and new identities, they will be the drivers of the change for the
Yeah.
rest of the people. And
It's
that
funny.
might be always.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. There's a tension here, which is reflected in our domains, right? You focus on the transforms me,
Right.
and I focus on the to transform us, right?
Yes.
And the way I've been framing it is personal, cultural, and structural transformation, right? So there's a personal transformation element. I want to make myself better. There is a cultural or community development dimensions, like I want to make my population healthier, a very poignant desire in the shadow of COVID-19. And then there's also, I want to make our systems better, right? Is that where are our health systems, our education systems, even our spiritual systems, where are they achieving the desired intent? Where are they backfiring and creating the opposite? And I think and just to kind of wrap things up here as we reach our time, I think the metric that we've been sort of dancing around, which we haven't touched on in this episode, is this idea of flourishing. What we really want is for our individuals and our communities and our systems to flourish, so that everyone is actually becoming the best version of themselves. And I think this interesting exercise here is, can we create a context where we are recognizing the impediments to that, thinking clearly about them, designing effective interventions to get there, and more importantly, like Newton, showing our work so that the larger community can see our blind spots, see our backfires, and create this self-correcting system that continuously improves against this analog metric that we can't yet articulate.
Wonderful. Yes, I think what people oftentimes haven't realized, that we as mankind have learned to create great technologies, great tools, and place them around us. And I think the illusion that many people fall into is that's enough. Like, okay, refrigerator, great technology. It makes food like stay longer.
Yes.
But and also remote control, like TV itself, it's of course, but then remote control, it's getting us into the comfort zones. And then this, but I don't want to go into too many examples, but I think the essence is that we have proven we pretty much can create any technology we want. But the delusion that we fall into is that this is the only thing we should care about. Of course, not everybody, and now the kind of it kind of backfires so that it reminds people to become more aware of their own evolution. So how we can evolve ourselves, because with all of this sophisticated technology, we have all the other human-related problems. So yeah, I think it's a time for great reminding ourselves, and then realizing that as we have been successful in creating spaces and technology and experiences, the same way we have capability and capacity to create novel ways for self-discovery in a way that instead of being trapped into this delusion that the help is outside, actually the actual transformation is inside, and from there it just amplifies. And again, not through the like saying predominantly like a technology driven social media or social networks, but through the natural human networks, which means societal human to human mirroring by showing through the examples. So I'm optimistic. I just like you, we have experiences, and this is how we are now mirroring it out. And there will be, I think, a great resonance for that.
All right, I think we will end on that note. I will record this. I will make up a name. I still haven't quite settled on what the name for this thing is. Humantific is a company. We were talking about a humantific revolution. Somebody already has that name. It's not a bad name. Another name that I've been playing with, this is the idea of human systems, which actually is a website by a guy I follow called Joe Edelman, which is about redesigning social systems to promote human flourishing. And thinking about a maybe human systems theory or human systems science, or towards a theory of human systems or a science of human systems, something like that. So I will play around with that. We don't actually get our own URL until we have like 50 or 100 subscribers, so we can keep changing the name as often as we want as we evolve, which I think is very apt, because the whole point is that we're trying to evolve who we are. And so we will keep re-encoding and evolving, and I will talk to you in person next Saturday.
Perfect. That sounds great. And yes, look forward, take it easy, take it like a flow kind of experience, and whatever comes, that's the essence of that point. And as I fully agree, anything can be edited and changed at any point, again, through the same flow experience. This is a great start.
Right. Be well and become.
Perfect. Agreed.